Which of these statements are accurate? GM crops are needed to feed the world's growing population. GM crops are vital to achieve food security. Anti-GMO activists in wealthy countries are keeping people in poor countries hungry by denying them GM crops. GMOs are needed to provide the crops that will enable us to survive the challenges ahead.
Well, what GMOs are needed for is to help industry maintain market power. I think Jeffrey can probably talk a lot more about that, but one of the chapters in my book that maybe got me excited in a particular way was about the market power issues, because I started out as an antitrust law attorney, so everything had to do with market power. And really, a lot of these biotechnologies are designed to, let's make something fancy so that we can hold it over people's heads, have them become dependent on it, whether it's legally or financially, and then expand our power and secure an industry for ourselves. So that's just kind of an overview, a little bit about that, more detail in my book, but I'm guessing there's other people who really here who can talk to that topic in particular.
Andre?
The real issue here is that the world actually produces 3 times more food than we need, and we waste most of it. There is no shortage of food. We have very unfair and inefficient distribution systems. And really what we need to go back to are local systems. And I can say this pandemic and now the war in Ukraine has shown the problems with these global supply chains. We are looking like we're going to face a famine now, simply because these long distance supply chains, growing all this food in one country, bringing it to another, are failing. Whereas we know with local food, and when I worked in IFOAM, for instance, in Africa, we could work with local farmers and get 100% increase in production and feed their communities. And this is what we're doing. And this is the real solution, not long distance GMOs to go to small, to most of these countries, because where we have food insecurity, because the truth is, this is an issue of poverty. The people who are hungry because they cannot afford to buy it. It doesn't matter how much we grow. We need to help them grow it and do it locally and look at it from a holistic way and poverty reduction. And we can do it through very good agroecological systems. And we are doing it, actually. This is the really important thing. We are doing it with millions already.
Julian?
I agree 100% with Andre. Basically, it is the explosion in industrial agriculture since the end of World War II that it is really threatening to destroy the entire habitable planet. I mean, it's devouring the soils. We're losing soil at a rate of 75 billion tons every single year. And that's cumulative. So we're going to lose half the world's soils by the middle of the century. Water is running out everywhere you look, but particularly in places like China and India, highly populous countries which have not got enough water to grow the food that they will need in future. So they're having to import their food from Africa or strange places like that. So, really we've created an industrial rod for our own back. Apart from the fact that the industrial food system produces 30% of the greenhouse emissions and it spreads 5 million tons of pesticide all around the planet, it's anathema. But the good news is it's going to break down. It's going to break down in the mid-century due to the climate impacts and the scarcities that I've mentioned. So this is an opportunity for us to completely rethink food. And I've proposed in a book called Food or War, because war is the alternative if you don't have enough food. Basically what Andre is saying, that, first of all, regenerative agriculture, secondly, urban food production. Our cities worldwide throw away all of their nutrients, and a huge quantity of water. Something like 2/3 of the world's nutrients are trashed by urban waste disposal systems. And that can all be, those nutrients can be recaptured and reused, but they're not being at the moment. So recycled food through cities, renewable food, as I call it, through the cities, and deep ocean aquaculture. which is a far less intensive, you don't need chemicals, blah, 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 form of sea farming. Because we're running out of fish. The world fish harvest is just about bottomed out now. It's not going to last, very much longer, the rate at which the Chinese are mining the oceans. So basically, we're going to have to rethink food in its totality. And regenerative farming worldwide is part of that solution. There are three pillars, I say: regenerative farming, urban food production, renewable urban food production, and deep ocean aquaculture.
Stephanie?
Yes, so I think there was this image when they first came up with these GMOs that it was going to reduce the usage of pesticides, and actually it did the opposite. And of course, they thought glyphosate was very safe compared to the other pesticides, so they produced all these GMOs. Most of the GMOs, I think the majority, are related to protection against glyphosate, which of course allowed them to grow their crops very cheaply. Just spray the glyphosate all over the crop and the crop doesn't die. You kill the weeds. And initially they saw a significant increase in yield the first year. They were very happy, but year by year, the yield kept going down and down and down. The amount of glyphosate they had to use kept going up because their weeds were developing resistance. So you saw this enormous increase in the use of glyphosate over those 10 years after they introduced the GMO Roundup Ready crops back in the late 1990s. And meanwhile, the soil is not only being washed away because it doesn't have enough organic matter, it's being depleted of its nutrients, depleted of its minerals, depleted of its microbiome is messed up. All of these issues with the soil, damage to the soil because of the chemical use of the Roundup, so that by the time you've been using Roundup for 4, 5, 6 years, your soil is much worse shape. Your plant is much more susceptible to insects. The plant doesn't have the kind of a hardy resistance to insects and to fungicides. The fungus problem becomes much more problematic too. So your plants are really suffering from the damage they're experiencing from the exposure to the glyphosate. The soil, the plants, the microbes in the soil, all of them are being messed up by the chemicals that are being enabled by the GMOs. So it's really a very broken system. And as everyone's been saying, we need to think in terms of regenerative, not just organic, but regenerative, and also using completely natural systems in the agriculture. No nitrate fertilizers, no phosphate fertilizers. We need to get back to a completely natural way of growing food, I think, on small farms with many different products, not just a monocrop, huge, farm mechanistic with all the machinery. We need to go back to the kind of farming that is still taking place in places like Africa.
Ronnie?
Yeah, none of those things have turned out to be true about GMOs, but I think it's also important that we point out to people that they realize now that the majority of the public is starting to understand this, and so they're introducing genetically engineered foods and products and just calling them by other names. Gene editing, lab meat, they call it plant-based foods that aren't really plant-based. And we've got to expose the synthetic biology wave, or genetic engineering 2.0, as a lot of people say. So, and I think it's important to realize that we have educated the majority of the public to understand that organic foods have more nutrition and they're better. The problem is when most people are at the checkout counter and they pull out their wallet, what they realize is there's not enough money in there to buy 100% organic, local, regenerative. So really, we've got to stop thinking that economic justice is a separate issue from healthy food and farming, because the majority of our population think that organic food, it costs too much, and what it means is that the rest of their life is so expensive that they are cutting corners, and unfortunately they're cutting corners with organic. But the pandemic, it's interesting, organic sales grew faster than ever, as did natural health supplements and home cooking. So I think people have gotten a taste now of their priorities, and we got to build on that. But we also got to make sure that low-income people and middle class and working class people have enough money in their wallets to buy the organic products that they need.
There was a very comprehensive report called the ISCA report, commissioned by the United Nations in 2008, 2,500 pages, over 400 scientists, and they concluded that GMOs have nothing to offer to feed the hungry world, eradicate poverty, or create sustainable agriculture. I interviewed many of the chief writers of this, including the co-chairman, and they agreed, saying that GMOs basically are a solution or a problem looking for a solution, or a solution looking for a problem. It had no fit. They do not increase average yield, whereas regenerative practices can double yield in developing countries. They create a model of monoculture, which is inappropriate for most of the world, et cetera, et cetera. And they wrote extensively on it. It's kind of the science is settled by the world's experts, but that has never stopped the biotech industry from repeating myths and then paying others to echo chamber those myths. So you'll still hear these lies, but it is clearly not the solution to feed the world.